Live. Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Christine Danner and I'm the Multimedia Manager for CTAN. It's great to see you back for our next speaker. And I'd like to remind you that while our speakers are talking, we would love it if you could put any questions into the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll address the questions after the talk. I would like to introduce Blake Putney, the Executive Vice President for Strategy at Hydrostar. We'll be hearing about his talk. A new catalyst is enabling low-cost electrolyzers that can make carbon-free hydrogen an economic reality. All right, thanks, Blake.
Okay, thanks a lot. It's good to be here. Again, with this Hydrostar company, and our objective is to be a major player in the electrolyzer market, enabling a carbon-free economy. So what we do is we build integrated solutions that are going to be based on a low-cost electrolyzer that lowers the barriers to carbon-free energy production and use. And by having a low capital cost, we can accelerate carbon-free green hydrogen production. This allows us also to build, our systems are simple, so we can build them in local environments. So for instance, we could build a factory in a an economic area that's having hard times, and they can build our systems and deploy them locally. So the purpose of Hydrostar is in the middle of this process where we do hydrogen production and storage. This power available for our systems can come from any sort of electrical power source, including solar, wind, nuclear, hydro, and biomass. We take that electricity and turn it into hydrogen gas. And with the hydrogen gas, we can make it into other chemicals such as ammonia, which is a fertilizer and uses about 5% of the, it produces about 5% of the global CO2. We can also build fuels and chemicals. You can put the hydrogen in the natural gas grid in order to provide heating. You can store it as a liquid for later use, or you can store it in a salt dome. The kinds of applications for hydrogen are transportation, hydrogen vehicles, hydrogen trucks. It's a chemical feedstock for a lot of different chemical processes all over the world. You can also use the hydrogen as a power generator in fuel cells or in gas turbines. Again, we can make fertilizer, we can make industrial heat, and we can also add our hydrogen to the natural gas to get reduce the amount of natural gas that you need for local heating. This chart kind of explains the value of hydrogen in terms of reducing carbon dioxide in the world. The table on the left shows you different kinds of energy: natural gas, battery electric vehicles, which use about 30% natural gas in California, heating oil, hydrogen, SMR, which is the typical way hydrogen is produced today from methane. That SMR means steam methane reforming. And then we can also, with a hydrogen vehicle, replace gasoline and diesel. The bar chart just shows you the different amounts of CO2 you can eliminate by replacing that energy source with hydrogen. And so the biggest value in terms of reducing CO2 is by using hydrogen to replace gasoline or diesel engines. The next highest is to use hydrogen produced with an electrolyzer and use that instead of hydrogen produced by steam methane reforming. You can also use the hydrogen as a heat source in a heater. You can burn it for regular heating. You can use it if you use a hydrogen vehicle instead of a battery electric vehicle, you'll save about 30%. You'll save about 6 or 7 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of hydrogen used, because the hydrogen will be produced solely by non-carbon emitting resources. And finally, the lowest kind of value is to replace it, the natural gas system with hydrogen. So this chart is shows you the role of hydrogen in energy storage. And so as we use more and more renewable energy in the grid, we need to find a way to spread that energy around when it's not available. And so these different technologies are shown in this chart. On the bottom of the chart shows you how much energy you need to store in magnitude, and the vertical line is how long or how often are you releasing that energy. And so it shows that batteries and capacitors and things like that are good for lower amounts of power stored for lower amounts of time. And so where hydrogen comes into play is when you have to store a large amount of energy for like weeks and months. And so this is generally comes into play when you're trying to store, let's say, solar over the winter. Next slide. Let's see. So the problem is when you're trying to achieve a very high penetration of green energy, wind and solar, for instance, they only provide power for about 15 to 50% of the time. And the problem is that if you're trying to store that energy in batteries for more than a few hours, it's prohibitively expensive. But if you try to turn it into a fuel, like using hydrogen as a fuel source, you lose about 75% of the energy converting the hydrogen from electricity to hydrogen back to electricity again. And so what this results in is there's a consensus that renewable systems need to be significantly oversized to meet the load requirements. That is, for instance, that you build a solar array that's capable of powering your city during the winter, and then the rest of the year you're going to have a lot of excess energy that you need, that's available for uses such as making hydrogen. The chart in the middle of this slide just shows you that there's an optimum, and that optimum is about 30%. So that means that there's going to be 30% of the capability of the solar and wind farms will be excess above and beyond what's needed by the electric grid. And the hydrogen will be there. Hydrostar will be there with their electrolyzers to capture that energy and turn it into an economically useful form of hydrogen. So the big problem is, if you noticed, since we're only operating 20 or 30% of the time, the cost of the electrolyzer system is what drives the overall system cost. And currently existing electrolyzers are very expensive. They have expensive materials that such as platinum and Naflon membranes. They are typically don't have economies of scale. They're about on the order of 1 megawatt size, sometimes up to 2 or 3 megawatts. If you're trying to store at the utility scale, that's hundreds of megawatts. And so the current technology is not really adapted for scaling to that level. And then finally, the power supplies of those electrolyzers are very expensive and also add to the cost. So our solution is a membraneless electrolyzer that's built from stainless steel. We have an electrolyte called B9 that lets us use stainless steel as the electrodes as opposed to platinum and other expensive products. So for instance, for a 1 megawatt electrolyzer, the current technology of PEM and alkaline electrolyzers, just the materials to build the electrolyzer stack is about 400,000 per megawatt. The power supplies are about 250 to 400,000. To contrast that, our membraneless electrolyzer needs only about $10,000 worth of stainless steel, and the power supplies are $50,000 to $100,000. The other unique aspect of our system is that it's built of small 1 kilowatt modules that are assembled out of concentric stainless steel tubes with some plastic to use to separate the hydrogen and the oxygen. And so by having these small tubes, we can build millions of these devices and achieve economy of scale and high learning very quickly. This chart just shows the theoretical difference between the two different kinds of electrolyzers. So if you have to buy a $1 million electrolyzer to do 1 megawatt, and you're trying to build thousands of them, you takes about $1 billion worth of electrolyzers to get down that learning curve. If our electrolyzers are built on the order of $10,000 a piece, we can make thousands of them to produce the same amount of power and get our cost down much more quickly. So the differentiators with our system is that we're able to build factories and build these systems to gigawatt scale. Our simple design allows us to have a short development schedule. We're in the process of bringing our system online and hope to have it in production within 2 years. Our system doesn't have any moving parts. It can be collected directly to power sources such as solar arrays without having to have a power supply in the middle. And this results in our cost to be about 10% of the current electrolyzer technologies. Our electrolyte has been tested by third parties and has been shown to be non-toxic and benign. So this results in kind of the business case or the cost of what hydrogen is going to cost in the future. On the right side, there's a table that shows these factors that you can use to calculate what the hydrogen is going to cost. The figures that come into play are the capital cost of a system. That's how much you have to pay to install the system. And that capital cost has to be amortized over the life of the system. And so if you're only operating at 20 or 30% of the time, that greatly increases the effect of that capital cost. The second factor is the operating cost. That is how much maintenance and other activities are going to cost in order to keep the system going while it's being operated. And finally, there's the efficiency. And so the efficiency is how many kilowatt hours of electricity are required to make a kilogram of hydrogen. And so currently, the commercial systems cost about $1 million. They're about 31 cents per kilogram of operating costs, and the efficiency is 55 kilowatt hours per kilogram. So if you have 10-cent power that costs 10 cents a kilowatt hour, that's going to be $5.50 just for the power alone. The Department of Energy has done some technology evaluations and evaluated what they think is potentially feasible with existing technologies. And they're showing that they could maybe get the cost cut in half to about $500 a kilowatt, and 14 cents a kilogram with an improved efficiency of about 50 kilowatt hours per kilogram. Our current system that we've bench tested is going to cost about $142 a kilowatt. The operating costs are a bit higher because we have to replace our electrolyte as it's being expended. So that makes the per kilogram cost of the operating cost a bit higher. And our efficiency is not quite where it is going to get to be, but it's about 67 kilowatt hours per kilogram. So we're in this development process, and we think we have a very high likelihood of decreasing our operating costs while increasing our efficiency. And then finally, our target, which we're hoping to get within a year or two, is this $88 a kilowatt, 17 cents a kilogram, and 50 kilowatt hours per kilogram. If you plug those numbers into a calculation of how much the hydrogen is actually going to cost, you see the chart on the left. That is the dollars. The cost on the left is the cost per kilogram of hydrogen. The cost on the bottom is how much you have to pay for your renewable resource that you're going to be using. So for instance, if your solar array costs, currently they typically cost about $1,000 a kilowatt to install. And so as these prices of these solar arrays and these installations go down, the cost of the hydrogen is going to go down as well. The dotted line in that chart at the $2.25 range is where the current cost of making hydrogen from steam methane reforming. And so currently, if we meet our target, we'll be able to produce hydrogen in Arizona for less than the cost of steam methane reformed hydrogen. It should get even lower once the cost of the solar arrays get reduced down to let's say $400. $400 represents about 1 cent a kilowatt hour power. So a typical installation for Hydrostar would be in Arizona. You'd have 50 acres of solar cells. That 50 acres would produce about 20 megawatts with a 33% capacity factor. That energy goes into a set of modules. Each module is about 2 megawatts in size. It's about the size of a shipping container. That takes this energy and makes about 3 tons per day of hydrogen. That hydrogen then can be used, as we said before. You can introduce it into gas pipelines or store it. You can liquefy it and deliver it that way. You can turn it into ammonia on site and deliver the hydrogen as ammonia. You can do methanization, which is a way of taking captured CO2 and mixing it with the hydrogen and making a fuel. And the fifth one, Fischer-Tropsch, is a way that you could also use hydrocarbons, carbon dioxide, and make, for instance, jet fuel or other kinds of aviation or transportation fuels. So the process that we're going through to develop this system is operating our hero device. Once we have that, we have to design the packaging. We have to understand what the application is in the market. So what are people going to do with the hydrogen? Hydrogen comes out of these systems at different purities, and so different applications require different amounts of purity. So for instance, if you were using it in a vehicle, a hydrogen vehicle with a fuel cell, you have to have 99.999% pure hydrogen. Whereas if you're burning it in a gas burner or something like that, it can be much less. The other part of our design is to optimize the system for cost and for assembly so that we can manufacture these systems cheaply and efficiently. Once we finish the system design, we'll be doing testing to validate the system elements, make sure that we understand how it can be produced. We also have to work on the safety validations and certifications so that we can have our system be put out in the field. And finally, the last step is developing the serial production, where we're looking for partners that would be interested in producing our system, trying to identify how the market size and how we need to how many systems we need to produce and how fast we need to produce it, and then developing the support and other infrastructure necessary to service our product out in the field. So the market for hydrogen for transportation, if they replaced a lot of the transportation systems, is about $400 billion. Ammonia, fertilizer, and shipping is $30 billion. And if we have to store terawatt hours of electricity, excuse us, the seasonal storage that I mentioned, that's about a $300 billion market. So if you've been hearing about hydrogen as a trendy new tool for climate change mitigation, I think this kind of shows you the market potential that's available there. So in terms of challenges, the main kind of technical developmental challenge that we have is because our technology is membraneless, it makes it more difficult to keep the hydrogen and oxygen separated. So we have to build some models and test rigs and things like that to help optimize how the flow of the hydrogen and oxygen goes inside of our systems. We also have been only testing our system at low pressure, and if you want to store the hydrogen for long periods of time, you need to pressurize it, and the cost of the compression systems used to do that are very expensive. And so we're trying to see how we can operate our system at a higher pressure and reduce the need for compression technology. In terms of economics, hydrogen is the electric grid, which is mostly natural gas now, is providing energy when the renewables aren't available. And so there's really not a call for storing hydrogen or energy for long periods of time. We're tapping into the natural gas power plants. And so until there's penetration of these renewables, so to the point where you need to overproduce electricity, hydrogen is going to be more expensive because of that cost of energy. And so currently, we're looking to find off-takers that appreciate the environmental value of carbon-free hydrogen. And we also need to look at other areas such as carbon taxes or tax credits and things like that to reduce the capital cost of the system so that we can capture that low-cost electricity that's surplus at the current levels, which are rather low. So our basic business philosophy is to build a low capital cost system to improve the cash flow of the projects that we need to finance, figure out where the benefits are for the sponsors, and identify where they may have some industries or extra power sources that are available as a energy process or energy sources transition to green energy and renewable energy. And finally, because our system is very simple, we'll be able to build the systems on site locally in places where they want to have renewable energy projects. So they can build the systems in local areas rather than having to import systems from China or other countries or things like that. So with that, I think I've finished my presentation. Ready to answer some questions. Hello, Sarah?
Hi, Blake. Sorry about that. We're having some issues on our back end, but that's okay.
Yeah, race through
the
talk, I guess.
Technical difficulties. Right. Christine will go ahead and ask you questions. Thank you. Oops. Or not. All right, that's okay. I can do it. All right, thank you so much for your talk, Blake. We have a few questions. One from Andy. Are there major safety implications of using hydrogen in the natural gas heating oil?
Yeah, so the use of hydrogen in a gas pipeline has been tested up to about 10% hydrogen. So it won't really be possible to replace natural gas in those pipelines completely without redesigning them. There's also some tweaks that you have to do because the hydrogen will make the natural gas burn a little bit hotter.
Okay. From Stanley, can you comment on domestic and international export implications and how hydrogen can make a dent with passenger vehicles, given that all the focus on electric vehicles?
Yes. So the main problem with battery vehicles from trying to get rid of carbon, is that the electric vehicles are only as green as the grid is. And so as long as you have natural gas in your electric grid, you're going to be emitting carbon dioxide to the atmosphere by operating your vehicles. Our systems are designed to operate on the site with a wind farm so that it doesn't even connect to the power grid. And so we collect the electricity from the wind farms and don't have any emissions that way. there's a lot of talk afoot to build large electrolyzer systems that make ammonia and use that ammonia as a fuel for shipping and transport the hydrogen as ammonia around the world. Kind of an interesting, ammonia is NH3, but it's interesting that liquid ammonia, which is shipped and stored all the time everywhere in the world nowadays, a gallon of ammonia has a gallon and a half worth of liquid hydrogen in it. So it's kind of interesting that you can store and ship hydrogen much more densely and easier if you change it into ammonia and then change it back to hydrogen when it reaches its destination.
Great, thank you. And from Matt, he wants to know where the original research and development came from for this technology.
Okay, so about 10 years ago, the two I'm sort of a founder of the company. I came along a couple years after they started, but about 2010, they started evaluating different kinds of electrolytes. And electrolytes are what you put inside of an electrolyzer to promote the water splitting into hydrogen and oxygen. And so these guys were in China, and one of them's a British guy, another one's an American guy. And they started experimenting there. And then in 2013, they came to Colorado, and we continued the development there. And currently, we have a research group in Oregon and another one in the UK working on the development.
What would be your top regulatory goals to make hydrogen more competitive with natural gas?
Well, the main, I think eventually once the cost of renewable energies drops down to this 1 or 2 cents per kilowatt hour, then it's going to be competitive on a purely financial basis. But until we get there, it's going to be very difficult to be, let's say, economically competitive. One strategy that I've been thinking of is just to sort of like in California, where they require a certain amount of ethanol blended into the gasoline. If you had kind of a virtual blending where any ammonia plant or refinery that needed hydrogen bought a portion, a small fraction of their hydrogen as green hydrogen, that would enable us to kind of build up our economy of scales without having a large economic impact on the people that are trying to use it.
And Jamie would like to know, what's the largest scale deployment Hydrostar has proven out to date?
So we're still in the development stage. The kind of projects that we're hoping to develop within the next couple of years are kind of a minimum size would be about an 80 megawatt wind farm. So it'd be a very large development. Those projects, including the wind farm, are about $300 million of investment. So we're kind of going from 0 to Mach 1 in a pretty quick time frame.
And Jamie would also like to know what's the rough energy loss going from solar to hydrogen electricity?
Yeah, so the electrolyzers are typically about 70% efficient. And then to turn it back into electricity again from hydrogen, there's different ways to do it. If you do it in a fuel cell, that's about 70% efficient. So it's about a 50% loss round trip. If you burn it in a turbine, and they have these things called combined cycle gas turbines that are about 50% efficient. So that would be about 35% efficient. So you lose at least half of the energy by going through that process.
Got it. And Thomas would like to know, when you were discussing the market size, was that for the US only or for a global market?
That's just the US. The global market is even bigger.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think that was all the questions that we had. If someone has any others, they can add more into the chats. But as we wrap up, do you have any final words of advice? Oh, it looks like we do have one more question here. I'll ask that from Matt. How do you account for the emissions associated with logistics distribution of the hydrogen fuel, given the current lack of hydrogen-powered vehicles? Do you expect to be able to create clean distribution infrastructure quicker than the grid and transition to mostly green energy sources?
Well, so one of our early markets we think is going to be actually powering hydrogen truck fleets. I think there's kind of a consensus, Elon Musk notwithstanding, that large-scale trucks are going to have to be converted to hydrogen in order to operate. And so we could use hydrogen trucks to deliver our hydrogen. We're also looking at some applications for shore power. So up in Washington, they have a need to provide power to ships that are docked at ports, and a lot of times those ships are burning diesel fuel to power themselves. And so we're building or proposing some hydrogen-powered shore power systems so that those ships could operate off of clean hydrogen rather than operating on their diesel engines. So we think probably along the same time as our system's developing, if one of the major markets is trucks, we would probably be able to use hydrogen trucks to deliver it.
Okay. And Andy, Thomas would like to know who in the world is leading hydrogen developments.
Well, it's kind of interesting. So there's about 5 or 6 companies. One of them is called ITM. There's Siemens, NEL, Hydrogenics. And last year, the whole market for electrolyzer hydrogen was about electrolyzer systems was about $50 million. And so there have been a lot of companies there, but none of them are very big yet. They've all been kind of building one of a kind hydrogen systems. And so there's going to be this transition if we want to have this carbon-free hydrogen. There's going to be a huge buildup. That market's going to grow by a factor of 100 to 1,000 in the next 10 years. And so there's a lot of existing companies, but nobody really has a head start yet. It's a market that's just becoming established now, and we're hoping to be a big participant in it.
Yeah, I guess that kind of goes along with Andy's question, asking, are there other companies building out equipment that run on purely hydrogen fuels?
There's if you've heard of Ballard, is a company that builds hydrogen buses. So people are starting to install hydrogen bus fleets. Hydrogen is good for buses because if you want to be green and you're driving your bus around in the middle of the day and want to recharge it at night, you don't have any solar energy to charge your bus up. But if you make your hydrogen, from solar power and deliver it to the bus depot, you can have carbon-free buses much more easily. Yeah.
Okay. So would you say there's an ecosystem that's working on
it's just now forming. So there's another company called Hyzon that's building trucks. They just announced a truck factory in Detroit. And so this whole industry is at its very infancy, and we're all trying to figure out how to work together and make economical solutions for different markets.
And I have a question for you. What are some of your best tips for people who are looking to break into the climate tech field?
Well, I think getting to know the economics of the market and how the markets actually work. There's a lot of information that you really need to understand about the fundamentals of the economics. One of the kind of fallacies that people, or you kind of things that you hear, is that solar power is way cheaper than other kinds of energy sources. And it's true that it's cheaper than other kinds of energy sources, but it's only around 30% of the time. And so you need to have some way of bolstering that. And I think trying to get a more well-rounded picture of looking at the global problem of how to solve getting energy to people 24/7 and having the background to understand that is really important.
Yes, I would agree. All right. If there are no other questions, do you have any final words that you'd like to say?
Nope, I think it's really nice to be here. This is my first Zoom presentation, so it was kind of interesting, and appreciate everybody's attention. It was relatively painless.
Yeah, thank you again. Thank you so much for your time and for speaking, and thanks attendees for your questions. We're going to have a little bit of a break now, so you can go head over to networking if you'd like, and we will be back with our next speaker at the top of the hour. So go ahead, take advantage of the networking time in the meantime, and we'll see you soon. Thank you again, Blake.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.